Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today we are looking at advanced mapping. This is following on from the recent Introduction to Mapping webinar that we broadcasted, I think it was last month. If you missed that session, don't worry, the recording is available on the knowledge base. It's also on our YouTube channel. But today we're going to be looking at the advanced mapping. So we're looking at groupings and flip codes and things like that. But Tony will take you through the agenda shortly. My name is Tom Jeffrey. I'm one of the education and media technicians. I'm joined by Anthony Launchbury, our senior education and media consultant. Tony will be taking you through the presentation today, and I will be on hand to monitor your questions and just make sure everything's running smoothly. In terms of questions, as you can see here, we've got the familiar question field in the GoToWebinar control panel. So if you wanted to submit your questions, just pop them into the question field there. I'll see those, and then I'll put them to Tony if I get a chance. We'll also look to include it in a Q&A session at the end. In terms of additional guidance, we also have a handout, which is in the handout section of the control panel. You can download that PDF, and that has links to the knowledge base covering some of the topics that we're looking at today, and some links to our YouTube channel. Oh, you've also got the option there to ask your question live via your microphone. So if you wanted to do that rather than put it in the question field, then you can use the hand raising feature. That's the little hand icon there, and then I'll send you an unmute request and you can use your microphone to answer the question live. So that's the housekeeping out the way. I'll pass you over to Tony and we'll have a look at the agenda.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Thanks for the introduction there, Tom. Let's load the agenda on the screen then. So hopefully everyone can see that loading up now on your side. As Tom mentioned there, we're going to be looking at mapping codes and grouping and flip codes. And we're looking at, it's a following on from the introduction webinar we did last month. So if there are any gaps in knowledge or any questions, feel free to go back to the webinar, the recorded webinar on the knowledge base. Also, just to point out, the handout that Tom's put together this time is going to be some really useful information on there about mapping and flips and so on. So worthwhile going to the handouts and just downloading that now, making sure you get a copy. We'll make it available with recording after for any of your colleagues that may want it. Okay. Now, to get us started then, let's carry on really where we left off last time. So last time we kind of started off, we talked about how we could drive information into CaseWare. We can populate it with charts of accounts from Sage or Xero, and when we map that chart of accounts with the map codes for non-corporates or accounts advanced, then what happens is that drives into financial statements and also into the lead schedules. Now that's not 100% accurate. There's actually an extra tier to this. The map code does go through and subsequently does help drive figures into the lead sheets. However, it's really predominantly the groupings that go through and drive lead sheets within CaseWare. So when we're looking at lead sheets, whether they're populated by the Mercia referencing or the HAT referencing, PCAS and so on, it's the groupings that drive the lead schedules. So when we've got map numbers, we've also got these groupings that work alongside them. Now, most of you probably haven't seen this because you haven't had to delve into it yet if you're newer to CaseWare. But if you have seen CaseWare or you're familiar with CaseWare, then you'd see these groupings within the trial balance, maybe LS Kestrian grouping or something along those lines. Now, it's really important to understand how these groupings get assigned and where they drive the values through into our documentation within our CaseWare file. So what we're going to do today is we're going to jump in and out some files, and we're going to be looking at this grouping and the mapping and how it's all linked together. Now, there are a few slides to help us along the way, just to make it nice and clear. What you can see on the screen now on the left-hand side is the mapping, and on the right-hand side is the groupings from Mercia. Now, where we've got the map code there, the first tier, that letter A, will describe to us whether it's a fixed asset. The corresponding letter there, or grouping, within Mercia groups referencing is E. So when we go through and we assign fixed assets, so if we go through, we've got plant machinery, we assign A01, 04, 00, and it's brought forward balance, so we'll say 01 on the end. What that does is it assigns an E grouping to that fixed asset class. Now, like the map number, it isn't just a single letter. The grouping is not a single letter either. There's tiers to it, which helps us structure the lead schedules and drive information correctly and focused within those documents. Okay, so it wouldn't just be an E reference, it might be an E1-1 or an E1-4, something along those lines. So we're going to see that as we go through, and we're going to jump into a file now. So I'm going to be jumping back and forth, so I'll try and take it quite slowly. As Tom mentioned, there's quite a lot for us to get through, so if it is too rushed or there's something that isn't clear and you want to recover it, then let us know in the chat field as we progress through. Okay, so I'm just opening up the file now, so hopefully everyone can see that on your screen in a second or so. There we go. All right, so this is one of the files we're going to be working with today. Now, just to kind of show you really, there's some tabs along the top here. I don't know if anyone's ever clicked on these. If you went to engagement, where you import or other year end, but you've also got this mapping section over here and grouping sections. With the mapping section here, it just shows you the whole mapping database. But also with this, what you can do is it shows you the groupings that are assigned to it. So there's an LS Kestrian grouping. So the map code might be CO5, or the full map code there might be CO5010001. It's got a grouping there of D2.3. And the D2.3 is what drives it into the schedules. Now that's just Kestrian. If I go along to the right, you'll see PCAS. If you go a little bit further, you see Mercia. So when we look at these really, so we use D, the bank overdraft there. D there is telling me that it's a current liability, the credit's due within 1 year. And then you've got a Mercia reference over here of J, and J would be the creditor schedule. And if we go to the right, well, we can see there's the HAT reference there of I. Now, with these, there are also grouped flips and mapping flip numbers. So as we go through today, the idea, the focus is to give you a bit more rounded knowledge about map flips, grouping flips, and how they work together and populate the accounts and these schedules. Okay. At the end of the session, what we'll do, time allowing as well, is show you how you could adopt a grouping and you could use these groupings, not PCAS ones or Mercia, but as you see as you go all the way down the right, there's quite a few groups on there. We go all the way down to group 10. So we've got a lot of scope for adopting some areas within CaseWare that we don't utilize for the accounts advanced templates to drive figures into these schedules that you may want to create. Okay, so hopefully we'll have enough time to show that, and we can come back and maybe use we've already got a preset example for some intercompany balances within a group file that we can use. Okay, so hopefully we're about to do a full example there. Now, just jumping back into the slides, when you've got this mapping and the grouping, it's important to know that with that grouping and mapping, there's obviously alternatives. So if we were to go through to the next slide here, you can see that you've got current assets and the creditors due within 1 year, so the C and the D. Now, there are going to be types of assets, whether it's like VAT liabilities, or it could be a current asset or it could be a current liability, and it needs the tools and the options to be able to flip between the two, depending upon what the balances are. So what you'll see when we look at map numbers, that there's also these map flip numbers, which when we go through and we define a logic to it, so for current assets, we define the logic that it should be expecting a debit balance. And then if it isn't a debit balance, then we can set a flip property to say, well, send that balance to the creditor's account, D, something along the lines. So we can set those up, but we can also set those up for groupings. So when we're looking again at, say, creditors or debtors or something along those lines, that we can flip in between those groupings back and forth. So it automatically populates documents and the accounts as we'd expect. Okay, now moving on, just gives a quick summary on the screen of what mapping flip codes do, just in case that wasn't clear enough for you there. So I'll leave that for a second just so you to have a quick read through. Okay, so really they're predefined and they're there to help us drive figures correctly into the right area of the accounts effectively. Okay, now what we've got here on the screen here is the mapping, the map number property screen. Okay, I don't know if you've seen this before, but you can get access to it in multiple areas within the accounts. And what this does is it highlights to us areas where we've got map flip properties set up. So you can see over here, we've got the flip type display of credit, and we've got the map number here of C0204. So if we assigned a account code to the map number D11 over here, that's our VAT liability account, okay, and it's there within our creditors due within a year. However, if we're working, say, on a new build projects and that construction company's got repayments due, then, well, it's not going to be, it's not likely to be a credit balance at the end. It's more likely to be a debit balance for that repayment. So what CaseWare will automatically do, if we've assigned that account code to D1102 and the balance isn't a creditor, CaseWare is going to flip it for us and send it through to C0204, which is the current asset. Okay, so what you'll see within the map number property screen is that that will automatically be set up in most of the instances. Now, just to show you back in the file quickly. So here we go. So that should be again loading back up on your side. When we're in the file, we can get to those flip properties or those property screen by going to account, assign mappings, and then assign mappings will stick to what we were looking at there, shall we? So let's tax due to HMRC, and then we've got our VAT. Okay, so down here, and then there's our VAT control account, then the map number for it. Now, if we right click there and go to properties, this is the screen I was referring to. Okay, so it shows us the behavior that we expected. And if it's not credit, well, we're going to go through and take that credit balance if it's not credit, and we're going to send it over to C02, which is our other debtors. Okay, so CaseWare is automatically going to populate and send that to our other debtors if it's not a credit balance. Okay, now you can modify these settings on a file by file basis. CaseWare is used with many different methodologies. So we're using charts of accounts from Sage or Xero. They've all got separate different structures. One of the examples we're going to look at today will be how do we handle this situation here. So all of you on the call will probably be very familiar with the way Sage structure the account codes for VAT. They've got simply a sales tax, purchase tax, and a VAT liability, which is the control account. We all know really when we go to post that TB that we've all normally got balances in all three, haven't we? It's never the case of that it's just netted off to the VAT liability account when we post it. So we're going to be using this as an example today and explain to you how CaseWare populates these balances and drives these balances into the accounts, but also the lease schedules, and give you a few tips on how to pick up when CaseWare is not quite populating in the way we'd expect it to. Now, the reason being is because, as I said, CaseWare is geared up to work with many different platforms, many different charts of accounts, and the flip properties that we set up for one entity may not be necessarily the ones that we need to use for another entity. So, for example, this here has just got one VAT scheme, UK VAT liability, but you could be working with a company that's got multiple VAT schemes. It does European removals, it's got a Belgian TVA, French TVA, UK VAT scheme. So CaseWare has to set these properties up looking at the case of, well, if it's got multiple schemes, what's the correct disclosure of that to separate those balances and put the credits in the current liabilities and the debits within the current assets. So there's certain behaviors that are set up which might not be applicable to every single file that you work on. So you may need to modify them as you go through. Okay, so we're going to look at the VAT and we'll use that as an example just to make it nice and clear and hopefully relevant as we go through the session today. Now, just going back into the slides here. So another just a quick example of the flip code, just in case that didn't make sense. What we've got there is we've got 2020 accounts balance there of 15,000. We've posted that to a map number of C04010001. So that's our bank account number one. Now, in the current year, that's got a debit balance in it, and we're doing okay. COVID strikes, and now we've got an overdrawn balance. So in the 2021 accounts, we've still assigned that account code to the same map number of the C0400010001. However, the balance is now negative rather than positive. So how does CaseWare handle that? Well, what we want it to do really is not post this minus 5,000 to C04, because that'll be our current assets, and that means we'll be understating those current assets. So what we need CaseWare to do is move it for us, so we don't need to manually change it ourselves. So what CaseWare does is it takes that 5,000 and assigns it to map number D02010001, our bank overdraft creditors. So that's what the flip codes are doing, just to make it a little bit more visual. And when we're flipping map codes, we also need to consider the effects of groupings, because map codes, as I say, will populate your accounts, groupings will populate your lease sheets. So we kind of want them to tally up, don't we? So we want the accounts to group back to lease schedules as you'd expect. So whilst we're thinking about those flips, remember we've also got groupings and group flips. Okay, now groupings and group flips on this side. First of all, groupings, they help us to populate lease sheets. That's the key bit there. So when we go through, lease sheets are essential and they are populated by those groupings. Groupings contain group flips, very much the same way as the map numbers do. So if there's a behavior that we can define, whether it's credit or debit or plus or minus, we know it should be a debit. Then if it's a minus, so we can send it to another grouping. That's within the product's capabilities. Now you can see that on your screen. Hopefully now there should be an image popping up there to the right hand side, which shows you the groupings. So that's G2, and then over on the corresponding side, you can see the opposite flip. So if we're looking at this, for example, so let's go back quickly. There we go. So if we're looking at G2, 7, well, if we were looking at this map code here, that's where it's going to drive into lead schedule. If it's the opposite balance, then well, we should be seeing it drive here to E2 schedule. Okay. Now, again, just to jump into the file so you can see this within the mapping property screen. So again, that should be loading back up on your side in a moment. Hopefully that's there now. So what we can see here, if I go now to my back control account and I right click and go to properties, I just showed you this screen a moment ago, but if you go to group 1 and group 3 to 5, here are all the CaseWare groupings. Now, CaseWare utilizes group 1 to 4 for Kestrian through to HUT. And what we can see here is that if we had a credit balance for our VAT control account, if we're using Mercia, then it should go to our J2 schedule. Okay, J2.14 there. So remember, that's a second tier, and that second tier helps us populate and group information within those lead sheets. Okay, the same over here when we get to our H2 schedule, we've got an extra 2 tiers on the end of this. So H2 and then another tier 2 and another tier of 5. That again helps us define information separately within these sheets and to group it together. Now, as you go through and you assign the map number to these, so if I was to assign the map number through to my VAT, then what it does is it assigns these groupings as we go as well. So I'm just going to press OK here, and I'm just going to close out this screen. I'm going to go to the trial balance. Here we go. Now, I've changed my TV a little bit from the last webinar. So this is pretty much what we left off with in the introduction. Okay, this structure. And if I scroll down now, you'll see, let's get to the VAT liabilities. There we go. So there's the VAT liability, sales tax, and purchase tax. I've already activated these 2 columns here as well. Okay, so these are my groupings. Now, this is using group 3, which is Mercia. If you're not using Mercia, you're using HAT or PCAS or Kestrian, then what you need to do is go to View, Reorder Columns, and remember over here you've got some hidden columns. There's your Edis Kestrian. Go down, there's my PCAS, and there's my HAT. So I've already activated my Mercia ones and put them here. Now, I like to do this for multiple reasons. First of all, if you're not familiar with the methodology, the lead sheets, then these groupings match up to the lead sheet references. Okay, so if we were we'll look at the creditors VAT here, we can see D11 C02. Well, that's the map numbers that drives into the accounts. Predominantly here, we've got the J2 reference here, which is our creditors lead schedule. Just to confirm that, we can go to Documents. So I'm going to go over here to Documents. And as we scroll down, what you'll see, if we get to J, there's my J, purchases and creditors. If I expand that again, and there we go, there's my J2, creditors due within 1 second. So we can see there's J2, and from my TB there, well, it should be populating J2.14. So that 14 there is a separate grouping which populates information, groups it within that lead schedule. So to go back then, let's look at the Documents Manager, let's jump into J2, and what we should be seeing there, okay, Social Security and other taxes. There we go. So, and that's J214. So that's that J214 where my mouse is circling, and go back to the trial balance. There's J214. So they're the same reference. So having it activated on the face of the TB allows me to see the link between the map number and the grouping. But also what that helps me do is locate where that lead sheet is, because I know that I should be looking for the J2 schedule, and within that schedule, there'll be a line that's referenced J2.14. Okay. So I always activate these to make it a little bit easier. Now, back to the point where I was just mentioning about a moment ago, was after looking at the assign mapping screen, we assigned it the map number here, but that also assigned the map flip. It assigned the grouping for group 3, and it also assigned the group 3 flip, which is that H2.205. Now, that's the information that's assigned as and when we link up that map number. So let's just jump back into the slides quickly. So there we go. That should be loading up now. So groupings are assigned to map numbers, effectively. That's what we just looked at there. So when we assign a map number, it assigns groupings to that account code. Now, when we look at those groupings, we may need to go through and modify them. So group settings can be modified as well. And just because CaseWare set that grouping up to go to a certain particular schedule, doesn't mean that we don't have control to drive that figure somewhere else if needed, okay? Or maybe CaseWare's groupings haven't been set up with the entity that we're working with in mind specifically. So maybe CaseWare's standard isn't quite right and we needed to do a little bit more. So we can always go through and amend those settings. So to amend those settings, then all we need to do is look at the actual group and flipping property screen, as you can hopefully see on the screen now. And in this screen here, what we can do is we can define the groupings at the early stages. So I can say change J2 or change H2 here to what I need it to be updated to. Now, this is all well and good and very useful at the start before we've mapped, okay? However, going into this window here, after we've already mapped our trial balance, isn't going to retrospectively go back and change the groupings that have already been assigned to that account code. Okay, so let's go through and see that on the screen so it makes it nice and visual. So let's go back now into our file. So that should again be loading on your screen now. And I'll give that a second to load through. There we go. All right, so from here then, what we want to see is that these settings have already been assigned, haven't they? Now, what we've got here with these is that we're going to go into the ins and outs of the accounts and the balances soon as well, just so you can see all the link. But we've got 3 balances here, haven't we, for our VAT. So we've got a creditor, we've got another creditor here of 2.6, and we've got a debtor there of 2.5. Okay. Now, CaseWare may not be grouping all this information together in the right way. So let's go and have a look at those properties again. So accounts, assign mappings. There we go. I was going to minimize that a little bit. There we go. So let me go scroll down to my D11 then. There's my D11, tax due to HMRC, there's my VAT, and it's here. So the first thing is that the CaseWare is grouping this information together potentially. Maybe it's not the right way. And effectively at some point you say, well, these map numbers or these groupings, we need to modify them. Okay, so if you go through to the map number here, okay, and you go right click properties and you say, okay, well, I don't want it to go to other debtors. Okay, I want it to go to somewhere else down the line. Okay, I want to go down to, or we'll just say tax recoverable for the time being. It's wrong. I was going to select this for the time being. And I'm going to change it back in a minute because it isn't right. And if I press OK here, that's just changed the setting. And I can right click properties and you can see the setting there. It's maintained, isn't it? So you can see it there. Press OK again. But can you see when I come back here that those settings haven't been updated? Those settings are still saying that it's going to C02040001. And that's because we'd already assigned that map code with the properties at that point to this account number. And it doesn't go back and retrospectively change it as and when we update the property screen. Now that is exactly the same for the groupings. So when we go down to D11 and we don't want the VAT to go to a certain area, so maybe the lease sheets, we don't want to use a flip, so we go to properties here and we change the flip for group 3. So we change it from H2.25 and we want it to go to, okay, we want to use this one, okay, amounts owed by participant interest. So we change it to there. So we can see it's changed there, can't we? Again, it's not the right one, so I'm going to come back and change it after. Press OK, press OK. But again, can you see over here, that hasn't updated, that's retained that information, and it's going to populate in the same area, okay? So that hasn't updated. Now, you can go through and update it on this screen. So we can go through and update it. But before we do, I'm just going to change those back to get the settings back to CaseWare default, which is what I recommend to us, is that we retain the CaseWare default groupings and we keep that consistency. So I would advise against changing these settings too freely. I would modify the settings in a separate way, which I'll show you in a moment. So here we go. Let's change that back then. So that's income tax recoverable. We'll go and I can see it now. Go to C0201 and there we go. And we'll change that grouping as well. And we'll change that back to the correct one. So other debtors, 5 on the end, press OK. And then, so this is where the core settings are. So just to try and give you the explanation of when these settings are applied. They're applied simply when we assign the mapping. Now, if we do need to modify these, I'll say we modify it from the face of the TB. Okay, so we can modify it from here. You can go through and individually update these. So, okay, I don't want it to populate here. I want to change that to the grouping where I said taxes recoverable 61. There we go. So you can change that there quite quickly and easily. Okay, just using that and then selecting select. That would update it. And then you can see there quite visually that the grouping is now updated, or the map numbers updated. And that'll be the same action that we need to take for the groupings as well. Now, I'm just going to change this back. I'm just copy and pasting, so right click copy. And just show you copy and pasting as well. Right, so at this stage then, we've got a little bit more understanding about groups and map number flips and so on. So let's go and see some of them in action. Okay, so we've got some accounts open, and the account should hopefully be popping up your screen now. You can see the balance here. My debtors amounts falling due within 1 year. I've got 3485480. Now, from here, what I can do is I can look at the lead sheet. So I can go to navigation. From navigation, I can click on the lead schedule here, and that's going to go through and populate on the screen and say, okay, well, here we go. So there's my other debtors. So in there, then I've got debtors 3485480. And over here, then we've got our debtors amount. So you can see the lead sheets there don't quite agree, do they? So there's my reporting balance for my other debtors, 2596. So why is my debtors different? What's the figures? Why are there changes? So let's close this screen and let's go down to the note. So I'm going to jump down to the note by clicking on the note referencing. And then we've got our breakdown here. So we've got trade debtors here, we've got other debtors with prepayments, accrued income. Now here, if I go to this 2596, again, I can click on the lead schedule button and it'll bring up that same information we just saw a moment ago. So there we can see my other debtors. First of all, it shows me the grouping over here, H2.2.5, which we just saw on the trial balance a moment ago. So you can see the way that links into it as well. As we go along the line, we've got my 2.5 million. There, I can drill into this. So if I double click, you can see I can drill down. And here I can see that I've got my purchase tax. Okay, so this is my VAT purchase tax, and it's all on its own. So it hasn't been netted off against the sales tax or the VAT liability. And so why hasn't that happened? Let's go back into the SI mapping screen to find out why. Now, when we go back to the SI mapping screen here, or even before we do, we can see the settings here are all equal, aren't we? So we've got D11, CO2, CO2, D11, so on. So they all match. So these two rows here are being treated differently to the 2.5 mil here. Okay, so why is that? So let's go into SI mappings and go down to D11. So in D11 here, let's expand that again, and there's our VAT control account. Now, from our VAT control account here, we can click on properties, and here we go. So I showed you earlier that we've got our map number, we've got our behavior, and we've got our corresponding or alternative map code, okay, depending on what the balance is. But we didn't look at this logic over here. So the flip type. Now there's different flip types. So we're going to use this drop down here so you can see them on the screen. The ones that you're going to see more often than not, individual, display of debit, display of credit, and then you've got the ones wherever it's using subsidiaries as well for group files. So you'll see those adopted in the group events, okay? Now, individual debit and display of credit treat the figures differently, as you'd imagine. Now, this one here is set up as display of credit. So what it's saying, okay, if the balance that you assign to this map code, so if the balance you assign to D11020001 is a credit, we're going to retain that balance. If it's not a credit, what we're going to do is we're going to send that balance over here. Now, as we look at these, we've got those three balances there, haven't we? So there we go. And this is the figure we'd be expected to see, aren't we? That 40,000. That's that outstanding liability at the year end. So that's what we'd be expecting to see there. Now, what we need CaseWare to do really is take this figure here and add it together and net it off with these two. Now, there is a setting that we can use here within this flip properties screen. So you can go through and select individual. What individual would do is it would take these three accounts that have been assigned to the map number of D11, and it would treat it as an individual balance. So it wouldn't treat the account codes individually, it'd treat all the account codes that you assign to that map number as an individual balance. Now, there's a good example of this if we go a bit further up and we look at our bank and cash. So if we look at our bank current account here, And there we go. So if we look at any one of these here, what we expect to see is that when we've got a bank account, potentially you may have reconciliation accounts. So you may have 2 or 3 reconciliation accounts to make obviously the reconciliation of those larger banks a little bit easier and less time consuming. So what CaseWare would expect to see is that maybe you've got 2 or 3 accounts together. So I'm going to say this 1205 is the reconciliation account. So I can move these up here. So what CaseWare would do, if account number 2 had a balance, it would add these 2 balances up and include it as a current asset. And the reason being, because you've got, sorry, let's go back up there. You've got that debit balance of the 1.2 million. Now, if I had this account down here and this account here had a credit balance, okay, well, CaseWare would automatically flip this and it would move it to my overdraft account. But can you see here that when I go to this account, it's got individual setup. So if this bank account number 2 did have 3 reconciliation accounts, you take those 3 reconciliation accounts, add the balance up, treat it individually and move it to the correct area of the balance sheet, okay? Now, with that little bit of knowledge and understanding, you can now see, maybe understand why CaseWare moves some balances and not others, okay? Now, the reason, and I alluded to this earlier, CaseWare sets its settings up like this to display if credit, is because if you have got multiple VAT schemes, if you have got French TVA, then you've only got one VAT control MAP number, haven't you? So CaseWare needs to make sure that those balances are treated separately, because you wouldn't want to net off your French TVA repayment against your UK VAT liability. They're separate balances, separate schemes, and they need to be shown separately on statements. So for that in mind, CaseWare's got the right treatment here if you've got multiple VAT schemes. If you're just working with a UK VAT scheme and you're using, say, Sage, where we've got those control accounts of sales tax and purchase tax, well, that behavior isn't going to be what we want, is it? We're going to want these really to net off. So you could go through and change this setting here, but as I said, there's an easier way for you to handle it, which would be to select OK, to come back here, and then to change these properties. So look at changing these properties here. Now, if you are going to change the flip properties here, then we also need to consider the effects on the lead sheets. Okay, so first things first, then let's go through and let's look at the balance here again on the account. So back to the accounts. There we are. So on here, we got our other debtors. So we know that other debtors amount there is going to be that repayment of the purchase tax. If we scroll down a little bit here, we've got our creditors, and then down on our creditors again. There we go. So going most from 1 year, we've got the balances there. So somewhere between our creditors and our debtors, there's the correct balances, and we need to make sure that they go into the right place. So first things first, then we know that that other debtor isn't another debtor of 2.5 million. So we need to remove this from the debtors, and we need to drive it onto our creditors schedule. Okay. So how do we do that? Let's go back to our TB, and then let's look at the mapping. Now, we know here that these two accounts, their behavior is absolutely fine because it's credit balance here and it's display of credit. Then the 2 balances highlighted there, so that 20,000 and that 2.6, they're being shown in D11. Okay, and over here we've got this one here, which is being shown in CO2, not D11. So to get this balance to populate in the correct area in the accounts, all you need to do is get to the map flip and delete that back. Okay, just using backspace. So now the flip's gone. That balance, even though it's a debit, has nowhere else to go. It can only go to D1102. So going back into the accounts, what you're going to see CaseWare do is update that balance, and it's going to drive that figure from my other debtors. There we go, and it's going to drive it into my creditors figures. Okay, and now if we go back to the balance sheet as well, we can now see that debtors figures now as it should do. And if we go into our creditors and we look at the lead sheet there, there we go, there's our social security and other taxes. So we drive into there, there's VAT liability and the sales tax. But okay, my creditors balance is now agreed, but my lead sheet doesn't, does it? So my lead sheet's telling me that I've got what's their reporting balance of 2637. Well, that's not quite right, is it? Because we know we've just moved that balance. Now our debtors is correct and our creditors is correct, but it doesn't agree back to our lead sheet. And the reason it doesn't agree back to our lead sheet is that although we've changed the map number here, we haven't changed the grouping. Now, as I kind of pointed out earlier, what we've got here is the group references. Okay, so these ones over here. And this is going to tell me where to look. Okay, so I need to look here. I'm looking at my J2 schedule. So I need to go to the documents and I need to look at J2. Okay, so what's in there? There's my 2637. That's what we just saw when we were in the accounts. And there's those balances. Okay, so that's that. Okay, so why haven't we got the other 26 there? Well, the reason being is because the trial balance here shows that we've got purchase tax here, and the grouping, the Mercia grouping, has got a flip on it as well. So the grouping here for Mercia is saying, well, if it's not credit balance, then send it to our H schedule. So because there's a debit balance there, CaseWare is not going to post it to J2.14, it's going to be posting it to H2 schedule. So H2 there, let's go and look at our documents again. And once we're there, we're going to open up the H schedule. There's my debtors, and there's my H2 summary. And if I drill into there, what we'll see is, there we go, there's my other debtors. There's the 2.5 mil. If I double click into it, then it's just confirming what we already knew. And that's account 2204 is in the wrong place. So when we go back, then what we need to do is go back to the TV, and we need to change these settings here as well, because I want this figure here to drive into the J2 schedule. So again, if I remove this group flip, that balance has got nowhere else to go apart from into schedule J2. Okay, so now if I go back to my documents manager, and now I click on my H2 schedule, you can see there it just updated on the screen quite quickly, but now that's removed, and now that 864 here agrees back to, we should be seeing, there we go, and that's the 834, 885.3, let's look at the lease schedule there. There we go. It's a little bit of difference there. We need to do work on to defer tax. So then that will show a little bit further down here. That's 24,000. Okay, so there's a little bit of work we need to still do the lease schedule, but you can see there we're pretty much there. Now, as I go back into the file now, then the next thing for us to do is check our J schedule. So let's go to documents. And what we should now be seeing on our J schedule is that, well, that balance is now the correct closing balance. So that 40,000 is the correct outstanding liability at the year end. I go into it, and there's my 3 accounts. Okay, so hopefully you found that helpful, and it kind of opens a few of the areas up and gives you a bit of explanation to why the figures move and why they're treated in the way they're treated. Now, I did also say that we'd hopefully have time to go through and show you how to assign your own groupings to maybe an intercompany schedule or something along those lines. Now, so I think we've got 37, so we have got enough time just to go through our demonstration. So we'll go through and set that up now. Let me go and open up another file. So hopefully you should see a second file open up on the screen. There we go. All right, so this file, it's got some additional balances in there. I've already had a little play around with it and set some up for group 9. Okay, now, as I said, CaseWare uses, it's 10 available groups. And for each group, there's a flip involved as well. So what we'll do, let's go through and let's look at our trial balance here. So in here then, what we've got, it's not a huge group file, just 2-3 entities in there. But what I want to do is go down here and we want to assign some, there we go, let's get that, there we go. So I want to go through and I want to assign some of these. So due to Dragon Holdings or due to Lizards, I want to assign that with a group number. Okay, and as you go through, what I want to do is maybe pick a few of these balances here, or a few of these account balances, as you can see as you go through, and I want these to drive into schedules. Now, CaseWare has built a lot of lead sheets, and most of the time they're going to cover exactly what you need. But there's going to be a few instances potentially where you want to create your own bespoke schedules to maybe highlight specific bits of information. I'm going to use these ones today, just so we can see these balances all flow through into your own lead schedule and show you how to create it and what you need to think of. Okay. Now, what I'll say is, before we get started, let's look at these groupings over here, mappings. I showed you earlier, we've got there's 10, haven't we? So Mercia is 3rd, 4th is hat, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and then 9th and 10th. So what I'd say is, if you're going to go through and create your own groupings or your own lead sheets, then I would adopt, say, group 10. It's unlikely CaseWare is going to use it, add a new methodology in there. So if I use group 10, then I know it's pretty safe that those groupings aren't going to be utilized by CaseWare UK. Okay. Now, in here, what you can do, and anyone can do, is go through and create your own groupings. Now, you could just use a drop down here, and you could create a new one. And you create new groupings in a very similar way as you would create a new account code. So if you're on the trial balance, it's just again new and create yourself a new account code. It's not dissimilar. Now, we could also create those groupings on the face of the TV, and this is where I would recommend you start because it's just a little bit easier to see and assign those groupings to the correct account codes. So I'm going to go through here then quickly, and I'm going to go through and show my group 10. I'm just going to show group 10 at the moment. I'm not going to show the flip as well. And that's right at the bottom of the list, so let's move that up a little bit. There we go. And let's put this up here. Oh, there we go. And then press OK. So that should now be, there we are. Right, so group 10, as you see, there's nothing in group 10. There's no group set up by CaseWare UK. So what we can do here then is we can look at these accounts. So loan from Dragon Holdings, I want Dragon, due to Dragon Holdings. I want these balances here. We're going to choose these ones here, and I want them all to populate on one schedule. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, we've got two accounts, C1501 and D1501. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to create, say, two groupings here. So let's go through, and let's click in the right group one, and there we go. I'm going to select this one here, and we're going to create a new group. So I'm going to go through and just use my initials, TL and 1, and we're going to say intercompany balances, and then press OK. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another tier, because I want to structure this potentially. I want to have this separated. So 2 of the account codes in one section, 2 account codes in another section. So might as well go through and then create another. There we go. So it's just going to go, I'll say, okay, let's say due to Dragon. Press OK, and then I'm going to just create a new one and just say TL. Now this grouping, I'm just using my initials here, TL. As long as it's unique and there's a defined structure to it, it doesn't need to be TL. It could be AP number 111. So it's up to you and what you want to set this up. It's just the example I'm using today, and we'll say this one is 2, and this is due to subs. So then you can go through and then select OK. Now, once you get these groupings set up, then you just need to allocate them. So due to Dragon Holdings, so due to parent, there we go. This one there is Dragon Holdings. We'll say that was due to parent as well. Loan from Dragon Holdings, okay, due to parent. And we're just going to, just so I can separate it on the schedule, I'm going to change this one, and I'm going to leave that one as T11 on 2. All right, so now you've allocated these. Hopefully everyone's seen that okay. Again, don't worry about the structure I've used there, the lettering and numbers. As long as it's unique and there's a logic behind it, it could be 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. It's up to you. That's just what I'm using for today. So I'm going to use this. I'm going to go to documents now. And what we're going to do is, you can see I've created the schedule there already, to just in case we're running out of time a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this, but first of all, just to show you where I started from, is I generally just copied this. So I right click and I copied this schedule, and I changed it from a debtor's schedule to an intercompany one. So to do that, once you've copied it, what you want to do is you want to right click and you go into properties. Let's just create a new one. Let's create a new automatic document here. We'll say it's group 10, and we're going to say intercompany balances. And then we're going to change the document type here. So this is a lead sheet, so just type in L, go down to lead sheet groupings. And then at this stage here, you've got how is this going to be populated. So I'm going to say this is account balances group subtotals because it's a group file. I'm going to change the grouping there to group 10. And the group structure here is going to go through and put those 4 question marks as wildcards. Okay, so it's just going to pick up any variation. And we'll say that's from group 1 there to group 2. Okay, so when you go through and you set these up and press OK, confirms it, what that should be doing then is going through and that should go through and populate those schedules. Now, here on the screen, this is the one, the group 9 one. So these are the group 9 ones we set up earlier. So I was just looking at the time there. And here you can see those balances all now populating through. So there's TL1, there's TL2. Now, this is the group 9 one. So if I right click here and go to properties, what you should see here is the only difference is that rather than looking group 9, I've got group 9 here rather than 10. And if you go down here, you can see the group structure. Again, you see those available to you. So you can select these from the group and to group position, and that's going to go through and populate those that schedule for you. Okay, all right. So if you've got any questions about those, then feel free to send it over to Tom. Again, I'm a bit cautious about the time now. I know we're nearly near the end, so I'm going to hand you over back to Tom and see if we've got any questions coming. So, Tom, have we got any questions?
Thanks, Tony. I think we've had quite a few questions come in that I think you've answered during the presentation. A couple of questions about reconciling the figures on face of the accounts with what's on the summaries, and I think you then went through how to tailor those. So I think those questions are answered to the viewer's satisfaction. But if that's not the case, please let us know. We'll get in touch after the session just to make sure you've got all the information that you need. We did have a question about having trouble reconciling lead schedules to financial statements on consolidated files, usually because of flip codes. And there was a follow-up comment to that, which was that I end up copying the TB, sorry, to Excel and sorting by map code and flip code. So is there any advice to make it easier?
Yeah, again, when you're working, we're looking at a very simplistic example today, Tom. So when we look at this files, it's not a huge TB. So when we're in, say, the environment that was mentioned, a group file, sometimes it's useful to close out this quickly. Back on TB, sometimes easier to sort things in order and follow it on. Now, I say that the logic we assign today and where to find out where figures are populating is the same whether you're in a single entity file or a group consolidated. So use these. Now, hopefully the understanding of the behaviors, whether it's individual flips or flip if creditor or flip if debit, will help you understand why those balances go back and forth. But effectively, what I would do here, rather than taking it out of Excel, I would just put it here and just sort by the columns in the section. Because if you understand that the H2 schedule is the debtor schedule and the J2 is the creditor schedule, just sorting it here hopefully should make it a little bit easier. Unfortunately, though, in a group situation, it's just inherently more difficult because there's more volume. So if you do get stuck on those, don't feel afraid to give our support team a call. They know groups, flips inside and out, so feel free to ask them, and I'm sure they'll help you along the way if it does get a little bit too much. Okay.
Thanks, Tony. So yeah, we're just overrun slightly, so we'll get back to everybody directly after the session, and keep an eye out for a Q&A document which will accompany the recording of the session on the knowledge base. So we'll move on. We'll just have a look at a bit more housekeeping, or signposting, should I say. So our schedule here is as it currently stands. But we definitely have some more webinars that are being scheduled, so keep an eye on the events page of our website, and you can see the agendas there and register to attend as you have done for today's session. So thank you very much for joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed the session. Keep those questions coming in and we will get back to you as soon as we can, and we'll see you soon on the next webinar. Take care.
Yes. Thanks a lot, guys. Take care.
Thanks very much.